morning or good afternoon, and welcome to Wednesday in the Word as we consider Psalm Like It Hot. I thought I'd begin with this old-fashioned tune, which kind of relates to the psalm we're going to look at today. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ, the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When darkness veils his lovely face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ, the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. All of the ground is sinking sand. When you go through tough times, you've got to make sure that you have a rock that you can count on that will hold firm within the difficult seasons of our lives. That's a sentiment which really relates well to our Wednesday afternoon. Psalm 74 is set amid the smoldering ruins of the Temple of Jerusalem in 586 BC. The enemies of Israel had captured their city and burned their beloved temple to the ground. No doubt this was a catastrophic event for the people of Israel, but there was a devastation behind the devastation which made its demise particularly poignant. You see, the temple was not just an important building, it was the key symbol of their national identity, the glue that told them that they were God's people, in God's place, under God's rule. Without their temple, the very center of their lives was obliterated, and everything, literally everything, was up for grabs. Their identity, their purpose, their security. Like the hub of a bicycle, when the center fails, everything falls apart. Usually when I read this 74th Psalm, I think about the burned down temple. I think of the horrifying pictures that you and I recall of the smoldering ruins of the World Trade Center in the days following that terrible tragedy in 2001. For that event had a similar effect on our own national consciousness. In one terrible day, the three central images of our national identity were compromised. After all, the Trade Center and the Pentagon and the Capitol building, which, as you recall, was the third intended target, are all three powerful symbols of our nation's financial prosperity, our military might, and our democratic institutions. When these were attacked, the very foundations of our country were shaken, and so were we. Of course, when I read this psalm today, I think mostly of the current health crisis, which has left hundreds of thousands of people grieving lost loved ones, and many more grasping for hope in the midst of a downward economic spiral with no clear end in sight. And because for millions of believers, the crisis has effectively shut down regular public worship gatherings, we're feeling spiritually homeless and wondering, why would God let this happen to us? So that's something of the current background to relate to this actual psalm, the feeling of loss and uncertainty and what's going on when everything that we really counted on seems to be in ruins. With all that in mind, let's sort of take a look at this psalm together. It's a little bit longer than we typically do, but I think it's appropriate for us to read it today. And I'll read the first 8 verses, and these basically ask the question, God, why did you let this happen? Verses 1 through 8. He says at the beginning, why do you cast us off? It's as if, have you forgotten us? And in the midst of this, he gives kind of a play-by-play or blow-by-blow account of how the temple was torn down. Listen to the text. "O God, why do you cast us off forever? Why does your anger smoke against the sheep of your pasture? Remember your congregation, which you have purchased of old, which you have redeemed to be the tribe of your heritage. Remember Mount Zion, where you have dwelt." That's the mountain where the temple was built. "Direct your steps to the perpetual ruins. The enemy has destroyed everything in the sanctuary." In other words, God, come up here with me. Take a look as I walk through this torn down sanctuary. He goes on. "Your foes have roared in the midst of your meeting place. They set up their own signs for signs. They were like those who swing axes in a forest of trees, and all its carved wood they broke down with hatchets and hammers. They set your sanctuary on fire. They profaned the dwelling place of your name, bringing it down to the ground. They said to themselves, 'We will utterly subdue them.' They burned all the meeting places of God in the land." Imagine what that was like. Well, we can imagine it some because we've seen a lot of devastation from fires right here in our own midst in the last few months. He goes on to say in the next 7 or 8 verses, verses 9 through 17, "God, why don't you do something? Why don't you do something about this? How long is the foe to scoff?" he says in a part of this next section. Maybe God, as we read through it, you'll see he says, like, maybe God will be stirred to action by some of the reminder of the past times he intervened on behalf of Israel. From the crossing of the Red Sea to the act of creation itself, God has shown his ability to bring order out of chaotic times. Listen to the text. "We do not see our signs. There is no longer any prophet, and there is none among us who knows how long." We can think about that when we think, how long is this current crisis going to last? "How long, O God, is the foe to scoff? Is the enemy to revile your name forever? Why do you hold back your hand, your right hand? Take it from the fold of your garment and destroy them." He goes on to reassure himself. "Yet God, my King, is from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth." Here he reminds himself of the Red Sea. "You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters on the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness." And now he speaks about creation itself. "You split open springs and brooks. You dried up ever-flowing streams. Yours is the day. Yours also is the night. You have established the heavenly lights and the sun. You have fixed the boundaries of the earth. You've made summer and winter." He remembers God's mighty acts of creation and of salvation from the Egyptians at the Red Sea. And so he closes this psalm with another plea in the midst of this lament. "God, defend your cause. Defend your cause." He renews his appeal, and as I read through this last section, you'll see some passionate imperatives that pervade this portion of the prayer. Remember, do not forget, have regard, let not, rise, O God, defend your cause. And in the beautiful image in the 19th verse, like a helpless dove against a wild beast, the people of Israel are helpless without God's direct intervention. Do something. Listen to the text. "Remember this, O Lord, how the enemy scoffs, and a foolish people reviles your name. Do not deliver the soul of your doves to the wild beasts. Do not forget the life of your poor forever. Have regard for the covenant, for the dark places of the land are full of the habitations of violence. Let not the downtrodden turn back in shame. Let the poor and needy praise your name. Arise, O God, defend your cause. Remember how the foolish scoff at you all the day. Do not forget the clamor of your foes, the uproar of those who rise against you, which goes up continually." Well, what are we to make of this desperate prayer recorded for us? And how can it help us as we walk amid the rubble of our current existence and don't know how it will turn out? I think there's a couple things to learn from this text. First of all, we need to affirm the important place of lament when we go through times of tragedy. We don't do this very well as American citizens and as American Christians. We've tried to preach a gospel which says just trust in Jesus, pray to Him, and everything will turn out. It'll all be good. Well, sometimes it isn't. Even though God is in control, we go through difficult times. And the Psalms are a tremendous resource to remind us that there is an important place for us to come to terms with our actual, real feelings when we go through really hard times. In fact, about 1/3 of the 150 Psalms could be classified as lament. Through this time, it's important for us to remember, as we think about the economic health, the physical crisis, the economic uncertainties, even the racial unrest. These are times for us to lament and say, Lord, our hearts are breaking. But another thing we see in this text as the psalmist works through his feelings by writing this beautiful piece of poetry, we see that the psalmist realized that the loss of the temple did not mean the loss of God. It was devastating, of course, for the temple was the symbol of God's presence, of God's election, of God's rule in their midst. But Asaph, the poet, had an extraordinary depth of wisdom. He knew that God was bigger than the temple, that God's commitment to them was stronger than any building. He saw behind the temple to the reality of their covenant-keeping God, and he prevailed on this same God to act on their behalf. What does this have to do with us then? Well then, whether it's the catastrophic devastation of our national symbols nearly 20 years ago, or the current pandemic and the devastation it has wrought, we do well to remember the psalmist's wisdom. He knew that as horrific as things were, there was a stronger security, a deeper identity, a surer foundation than the bricks and the mortar of their beloved temple. Even though they could no longer meet there, they knew God was still with them. Though they grieved that they could no longer gather there for worship, they knew they were still God's people. They could count on God's commitment to them, even though it felt like God had abandoned them, and even though the normal routines of their spiritual life were broken. We need to remember that too. You see, for the psalmist, the sign of God's commitment was seen in their ancient victory over the Egyptians at the Red Sea. And in a breathtaking piece of insight, the psalmist's assurance that the God who had created this world out of chaos was irrevocably committed to it. God specializes in bringing order out of chaos. God had done it before. God would do it again. No matter how it looked and how it felt, he would trust God. You see, on this side for us, on this side of the incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection of Jesus, we too, and even more so, have an absolutely secure foundation of hope. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. You see, for the God who blessed humanity in the first place by creating this world, has blessed humanity in the second place by becoming one of us, by walking in our skin. And the God who rescued Israel on the shores of the Red Sea has rescued all of humanity by dying on a tree and by his subsequent resurrection. Consequently, no matter what the setback, whether national or personal, ultimate victory is assured. We grieve at personal and corporate loss, but the ultimate center of our lives is rock solid. We plead with God to rectify the individual wrongs that we have seen, because we know God has already rectified the ultimate wrongs through his death and his resurrection. In the meantime, we do well to re-examine our ultimate hopes. For many of the Israelites, their faith was in the temple itself. rather than in God, the God who had placed his presence there. As a result, when the temple was gone, so was their faith. We face the same danger if we place our faith in the wrong things, whether it's the national symbols of prosperity, security, or government, or the personal symbols of houses and cars, health and careers, friends and family, or even the spiritual symbols of places where we can gather for worship. For any of these good things, should they become ultimate things, quickly become idolatrous things. And sometimes it takes a catastrophe to be reminded where our ultimate hope lies. For as the old hymn states, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All of the ground is sinking sand. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, it's hard when we go through hard times and we can't see the way through it. But help us, like the psalmist, to be able to realize that there's a surer foundation that we can count on. That the God who created us and the God who has redeemed us is a God who will take care of us. Help us to place our hope and trust in him and not in any other thing. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.